Hello, welcome to Board with Paint. Today we're going to be painting Freddy Krueger from the fan-made Terrified remake of Ravensburger's Horrified board game. This conversion takes the classic monsters out and replaces them with villains from the slasher movies of the 80s and 90s, including Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Chucky, and some of the other ones. The conversion is very professionally done. You can find some of the details on BoardGameGeek.com. For the miniatures, you can purchase them from the UNB10 Etsy shop. These miniatures were commissioned specifically for this board game conversion and are very high quality. I'll put a link to the Etsy shop down in the description, as well as a link to the materials on Board Game Geek. Without further ado, let's get started painting. Off camera, I primed the miniature in black followed by white from above to give us a sense of where the shadows will be. We'll start off painting Freddy's skin with Screamer Pink from Citadel. I decided to go with a pinkish, purplish tone for the skin so that it stood out against the red of the sweater. I didn't want those two to blend in since the miniature is so small. You may want to do 2 coats just to make sure you have a good smooth base. I'm going to use Vallejo model color black gray for Freddy's pants. I'm going for a black look to the pants, so we're going to start off with a gray and we'll be able to bring that down the shade later. There have been various versions of Freddy throughout the different films. I believe in some movies he has brown pants, but I like the look of the black the best. The Nightmare on Elm Street movies were some of the first slasher movies I ever saw in my life, and I remember many sleepless nights worried that Freddy was going to get me in my dreams, staying up late trying not to go to sleep just like they do in the movie. I'm sure he showed up in my dreams here and there, but I've survived so far. He's gotten decidedly less scary over the years, but let me know down in the comments if he scared the crap out of you as a child. Now we'll paint Freddy's Christmas sweater, and we'll grab Mephiston Red from Citadel and lay down a base coat on the entire sweater. We'll do the stripes later on. In the first Nightmare on Elm Street film, Freddy's sleeves are actually entirely red. I didn't realize that until I was doing research for this video to see what colors I should be using. And the first movie, the sleeves are red, the stripes are only on the torso part. It was only in the subsequent movies where the stripes were put on the entire sweater, sleeves and all. Again, we may need a couple of coats to make sure we get this covered. Now we use Vallejo model color German camouflage black brown. This will be for the boots and for the hat. I'm going for a dark, dirty, worn leather look for both of these elements. Now we'll move on to painting Freddy's iconic glove. Here I'm laying down a base color of XV88 from Citadel. This only needs to be painted on the portion of the glove that's made of leather. So that would be the palm of the hand and the back of the hand and up onto the fingers. The knives on the fingertips will be painted with a metallic color later on. Now to really add some Christmas spirit, we'll paint in the green stripes on Freddy's sweater. For this I decided to use Misfits Green from Scalecolor. If you look very closely, you can see that some of the stripes are sculpted on the miniature, but I think the 3D print lost some of the detail on the arms and on various other parts of the miniature. I'm just using those as sort of a guideline where I can see them. Otherwise, I'm just sort of laying it in where I feel like they should be. You'll want to use a pretty fine brush for this and take it slow so that your lines are nice and straight and even. If you make a mistake, you can go over the edges and clean them up with the Mephiston Red. As I mentioned before, in the first Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's arms were completely red on the sweater. But I think when people think of Freddy, they think of the stripes covering the entire sweater. So I've decided to go that route and paint the stripes on the sleeves as well. If you want to mimic the look of the first film, or if you're just tired of painting these little stripes, you could opt to leave the sleeves completely red. When I get up near the shoulders, I'm not continuing the stripe over onto the torso. I'm ending it as if the sleeves were made out of a separate piece of fabric. So there would probably be a seam up there where the arms attach to the rest of the shirt. So I am just stopping the stripes at the shoulder to kind of give an impression that those are two separate pieces of fabric on the sweater. So that finishes up our base coats. Now let's move on to some highlights. We'll start off by highlighting the boots and the hat by mixing some XV88 in with the original base color of the German Camo black-brown. I'm kind of stippling this on to give the boots sort of a rough and worn texture. For the hat, I'm continuing the stippling motion around the brim and up along the top. This is going to give that impression that the hat is worn and beat up. I'm hitting the very edge of the brim with some of this to give it a sort of bright outline. The brim's where a lot of the wear and tear is going to be, so that'll actually be brighter than the rest of the hat. Next, we'll boost the highlights a little bit by adding a little bit more XV88 into the mix and applying this again to the boots and the hat. In this case, we'll be covering a smaller area. On the boots, focus more towards the toe and the top. And on the hat, we'll focus out near the brim and the top. We're going to avoid the bottom side of the hat. We want that to be extra dark. And that'll provide a good contrast against Freddy's face once we go in and do some highlighting and detail work there. Here I'm just reinforcing that edge highlight around the brim. Now we'll move on to highlighting the pants. For this, we'll mix a little bit of Mechanicus standard gray into the black gray. And we'll use this to highlight the upper parts of the folds in the pants, and also down the leg that's bent outward a little bit, and on the back of the calves where there's some more direct light hitting. We don't want to over highlight this because we want the pants to really read as black. If you feel like you go too far with the highlights, it's not really a big deal. We're going to be toning this down with some shades in a later step. I'm going to boost the highlights a little more for the more extreme parts by mixing some sky gray into the Mechanicus standard gray. We'll just be using this on the tips of the folds where they are most directly being hit by the light. We don't want to cover all of the highlight we've already put on in the previous step. Now we'll move on to detailing Freddy's face. This miniature is a pretty small scale. It's smaller than the standard sort of 28mm, so the eyes are extremely small in this miniature. I'm painting those first with sky gray. That way, if I make a mistake, which I did, I can go and touch it up with the Screamer pink that we used earlier. Freddy's mouth appears to be open here, and I'm interpreting that as him smiling, as if he's just caught someone, he's ready to go in for the kill. We'll also use sky gray for this. And you can see I go in and touch it up with the Screamer pink to get it nice and clean. Now we'll go and start highlighting the face. For this, I'm grabbing some Kislev Flesh and mixing that in with the Screamer pink to get sort of a light pinkish fleshy tone. We'll use this to highlight both the face and the hand that's not wearing the glove. It's not really clear if Freddy's hand is as burned as his face. I've seen it in pictures where it looks pretty normal, and in others where it looks like it might be burned up. I'm just using the same color here. I think the miniature's small enough where it doesn't really matter what you do, as long as it's a different color than the gloved hand, obviously. Now moving on to the head and face itself. There's not really a lot of detail sculpted here, so what I'm basically doing is just painting a bunch of lines in random directions all over his face to sort of mimic the scarring and burning. And we're going to layer this up with a few different colors just to give it some depth. I didn't find it all that useful to work from a reference photo. The burning and scar pattern seems to change from film to film, and kind of nailing down how each little section of his face should look was pretty difficult at this scale. So it's really just random lines of scarring. Here we're repeating that process again with pure Kislev Flesh. We do want the Screamer pink to show through in a few places. That's going to give us the impression of the areas that are most damaged on his face. This also works as a shadow color. With the Kislev Flesh, I'm hitting some of the areas that I would normally hit when highlighting a face. That includes the nose and the cheeks, so that they stick out a little bit and make the miniature more readable. Now onto the glove, which is basically a leather work glove with sort of a bronze or copper gauntlet around it, and then the fingertips of the gauntlet have the knives welded onto them. I'm using Vallejo Game Color Tinny Tin to paint the copper parts. This is sort of a brown metallic color, but it still has a good bit of silver in it, so I think it'll fit in nicely for this glove. The thumb should remain leather, so we're going to avoid that with the metallics. Now for the finger knives, I'm using Vallejo Model Color Natural Steel. There's a lot of blue in this metallic color, so I think it provides a nice contrast against the tin. Now we'll highlight the metallics by mixing some silver in with the tin, and then we'll mix some silver in with the natural steel to do the knives. I'm purposely being a little sloppy here with these highlights because the highlight color can also act as damage and scratches to the underlying metal. And here we're mixing the silver in with the natural steel to highlight the blades. I'm going to push the highlights on the knives a little further for a couple of different reasons. First of all, I think brighter highlights on blades make them look sharper. Second of all, even though Freddy is pretty covered in soot and dirt on his clothing, I think he actually would take good care of his knives and keep them nice and sharpened. That's pretty much the only thing on him that I want to be clean. Now we'll highlight the leather part of the glove, and I'm just mixing in some Kislev Flesh with the base color XV88 because I have it on the palette, and it's a pretty good highlight color for a light brown like that. Moving on, next we'll highlight Freddy's shirt, and I'm using Bloody Red from Vallejo Model Color to highlight all the areas of the shirt outside of the green stripes. This is going to go on the raised areas and any of the folds, which surprisingly there's not too many on the sweater. We don't want to over-highlight the red on Freddy's shirt because then he'll end up looking too colorful and he may end up looking a little bit like a clown, which I don't think would go over that well with Pennywise, who we'll be painting in a future video. With the red stripes highlighted, let's move on to the green. And I'm mixing some Slimer green in with the Misfits Green to apply these highlights. For the first layer of highlights, I'm making sure to hit every single stripe on the shirt. The Misfits Green by itself is a little bit too dark, and they almost look black against the red because of the high contrast between those two complementary colors. So adding the more saturated green mix over top of them makes them read a little better as actual green stripes. Try to leave a little bit of pure Misfits Green around the outside edge of each stripe. That'll provide a nice edge and will separate the red stripes from the green stripes a little more clearly and make them easier to see since it's such a small miniature. Now I'm hitting the stripes again with pure Slimer green. This color by itself is just going to go on the raised areas. It'll be a more traditional highlight, the way we highlighted the red. With the highlighting done, let's move on to shading a few areas. First off, we'll use some Seraphim Sepia shade on those pearly whites. We don't want Freddy to have a nice bright smile. We can also shade the glove with this, and that'll give a little bit of rust color and wear and tear to the leather parts. Next, we'll cover the pants in a nice thick layer of Nuln Oil. This can go over both the highlighted and unhighlighted areas and should bring everything back down towards black. After letting it dry, we can apply this more than once to increase the amount of darkness. This is also going on the boots to give them a little bit of dirt. Now we'll dirty up Freddy's clothes a little bit more. I'm thinning down some Nuln Oil with some Lamian Medium from Citadel. I'm just mixing this together. It's sort of a 1-to-1 mixture. I don't want the Nuln Oil to be too dark here. I want to be able to build up some contrast. So here I'm just putting it on in splotches on various parts of the sweater and on different parts of his clothes that I want to look dirty. The man was in a fire after all. I'm also using this to boost the shadows and add some separation between different elements, like the glove and the edge of the sweater where it hits the hand. Now we'll move on to painting the base with Misfits Green. Feel free to do something more elaborate with your base. I prefer to use a solid color here just because, for gameplay reasons, some of the other components associated with Freddy are green. That's sort of the color of his piece on the board, so I want there to be some cohesion there. Misfits Green doesn't cover that well, so I had to put on 2 or 3 coats. I noticed on final inspection that the sweater in the back is frayed at the bottom, just like it is in the front. The way the 3D print was oriented, I think, means that some of the detail was lost on the back of the miniature, but I did see it when I inspected the miniature again later. This is just quickly being painted with the red colors, Mephiston Red base coat, and then I'm applying a quick highlight using Bloody Red. And while I have the bloody red out, I decided to go and highlight some of the sweater a little bit more to add a little bit of contrast now that I see it with the highlighted green. I'm returning to the Nuln Oil here just to boost the shadows a little bit. I'm doing between his legs on the pants and under the arms and along the edge of that frayed area of the sweater we just painted. I'm just adding a little bit of shade here and there to increase the shadow contrast where I think it needs a little more. And that wraps up Freddy Krueger. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so glad that I got to share this experience with you. Freddy was such an iconic part of my childhood and the reason I couldn't sleep for half of it, and I was really excited to get a chance to paint him. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. I post in-progress works sometimes on there, as well as previews of what I'm going to be working on next. And I also encourage you to take a look at the Terrified expansion for Horrified. Again, there's links in the description. The people that worked on this did a really nice job, really professional. The miniatures are really nice. It's been a joy to paint Freddy, and I'm looking forward to painting more of them in the future. So until then, happy painting.